What's up, Flannelverse? What's up, Endgamers? We are here to talk about the Monday Night Football game between the Chiefs and the Saints. I'm here, of course, with Adam ShipMyMoney Scherer. We're going to go position by position, quarterback, running back, receivers, tight ends, defense, and kickers, talking through each team individually. And then we'll take any questions that you have along the way. Adam, how did your Sunday go?
Not great. I mean, could have been better, could have been worse. I lost a little bit. I finished 14th in the FanDuel Millie. So obviously that could have been a bit better. First was a guy that played a 6-team train. So
I saw that because Petty Theft was seventh.
Yeah, I was gonna say it was annoying for me. It was really bad for Petty. So that really sucked. Yeah, I pretty much broke even, all things considered. I had a good last Thursday, so I was coming into the weekend already up 5-6K. I was like, oh, this is gonna be a great weekend. I'm pretty much now back to even, give or take. But yeah, could have been better, could have been worse.
Still pretty good NFL season for you so far. You've had Showdown win, 2-game win, so overall going pretty well.
Yeah, been a good season so far.
What's up, guys? Thank you for joining us. Of course, we are simulcasting here to both of our channels. If you have not already subscribed, please do subscribe to the Flannelverse and Endgame Syndicate. We're both trying to grow our small channels. If you like the videos, that's always helpful. Commenting, all the different interactions, really helpful. But the biggest thing is we're trying to grow the channel. So if you would subscribe, we would appreciate it. We're going to be going again, position by position here. I was just telling Adam right before the stream started, Scott Barrett sent me a tweet that I think is pretty interesting it's at Matt Derrick on Twitter. So just want to get this out there before we continue into the slate. And I don't know how impactful this will end up being. The first part of it, he tweeted just, Kareem Hunt will be the Chiefs starting running back against the Saints Monday night. This is kind of what everybody has been anticipating anyway. But then the additional kind of interesting part to the tweet, he says, Justin Ross and Nico Remigio both received first-team reps this week at receiver, with Rashee Rice and Mecole Hardman dealing with a knee injury. The Chiefs have until 3 p.m. to make practice squad elevation. So that's something we'll need to monitor. Of course, I'll have that information before I do my pre-lock show later, who's in, who's out for the Chiefs, but wanted to get that little nugget out there while I'm thinking of it. Because Adam, man, it's been a struggle for me. I've been pretty tired the past few days, so a little bit spacey. So when I have something I really think should be shared, just want to get that out there while it's on my mind instead of waiting for. Usually I'd probably just wait until the receivers portion of the show, but I've been so spacey the past few days. Just want to get that out there now.
Yeah, makes sense for sure.
Yeah. Let's do so we'll start with quarterbacks here. And I was just telling Adam before the show also, I didn't realize that I had been using faulty projection sources. So you do need to click this reset button to get the updated projections here in lineup HQ. It's been kind of a struggle for me since I've started using it. Sometimes things have seemed pretty off, and that's apparently just an issue on my end where I needed to update the projections. So that is good. Going to be a little bit smoother going forward, where I don't need to double check every single projection elsewhere. The ownership projections and such seem a lot better since I discovered you can just reset the projections. I thought it did so automatically, but apparently clicking this reset button will update things for us. So that is going to be helpful going forward. Again, we're going to start with the quarterbacks, Patrick Mahomes, Derek Carr, and we can look at the projections, multiple sources here. Mahomes with a projection of 17 fantasy points on the Fantasy Points website at $11,000. Not a great point per dollar play. Derek Carr, 14.5 at 9,600. If we pull up Roto Grinders projections, actually I have the Blitz projections in here. Let me change that. Going to reset one more time. Make sure these are updated. We have Mahomes at 18.79. So a little bit of a better projection here. And then Derek Carr at 14.5. Adam, what is your level? And we can actually projected ownership. We have Mahomes at 49%, Derek Carr at 36% in the flex. In the captain spot, we have Mahomes 14% projected ownership, Derek Carr down at 6%. Okay, so yeah, these seem way more accurate to me just at a glance. These projections. Adam, what level of interest do you have in Mahomes and Carr, and how much are you stacking them when you have them in your lineup?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously more interested in Mahomes than Carr because it's Patrick Mahomes and Derek Carr. Not that obviously Carr's been very, very good this year, but the thing that's standing out to me right now, at least, is how often Patrick Mahomes is showing up at captain for me in optimal lineups. His optimal rate at captain for me is a lot higher than his projected ownership, which is already pretty high. I think there's a chance that maybe that changes throughout the day, where the how often I'm projecting him to be captain comes down, or maybe the ownership comes up. But it does, I think, also kind of just make sense logically when you're talking about a Kansas City team that obviously is a good offense. You have Patrick Mahomes, a quarterback. You still have Andy Reid as your coach, but they've been an offense that typically, spreads the ball out a lot anyway. And then now they're playing without Rice. So I think that does increase the chances where, Mahomes can have a big game, but it's not necessarily to any one in particular receiver. And then, you also factor in that Travis Kelce, who is the most likely pass catcher to have a big game, I think, is relatively expensive. So it does kind of make sense to me logically how often Mahomes is showing up for me at captain, even though he's not really a running quarterback. Usually when you see a quarterback showing up at captain 20+% of the time, it's somebody that runs a lot, which Mahomes can run a little bit, but he's not Lamar Jackson or Jaden Daniels or somebody like that. But I think it does just make sense in that a relatively high percentage of the time that he does well, or that the Chiefs offense does well, it's not necessarily through one pass catcher. And so that will drive up Mahomes being captain. So I do like him a lot at captain. Carr, not nearly as much at captain for me, down around like 3 or 4%, but still, clearly can play him there sometimes, but does look like a good flex play to me. Does clearly have two very good receivers in Olave and Shaheed. So I think Carr looks fine, but the thing that really stood out to me was just how often Mahomes is showing up at captain in optimal lineup.
Yeah, that is interesting. And one other thing that becomes interesting with Mahomes, so it's usually pretty straightforward. Like if I have a quarterback who doesn't run a ton in the captain spot, I want him to be stacked with multiple pass catchers. And if I have them in the flex, I want them stacked up because they just don't pass so much. Mahomes is like sort of a unique case because he spreads the ball around so much. So it is possible for, like, it's more likely for Mahomes to be optimal in the captain without bringing multiple pass catches along because he spreads it out to like 8 receivers. Some games it's just like it's so spread out. So it's like you can kind of loosen up those rules a little bit, I think, in terms of having Mahomes in the captain spot without multiple pass catchers, because he can spread it around just so much that none of them, usually it's like, well, you need the quarterback, if he's a non-rusher, to spread the ball around to be the optimal captain, so one of his receivers doesn't outscore him. But now he spreads it around so much that it's like, well, maybe none of them get there anyway. So I think probably more viable to just have one pass catcher in the flex with Mahomes a captain. Is that kind of what your sims are showing you?
Yeah, so I don't have it. I can't see like how often he is paired with guys. But the thing that stands out to me is when I look at the individual players that he's paired with when he is the optimal captain, the most frequently used flex player in Mahomes' captain lineups isn't even on the Chiefs. It's Alvin Kamara. And then Travis Kelce is second at like 51% of the lineups where Mahomes is captain. Usually when we do these shows and you're talking about non-rushing quarterbacks, the highest owned or highest used flex guy in those lineups is one from his team, and usually going to be in that like 60 to 70% range. So Kelce coming in at the highest mark amongst Chiefs at only 51% really stands out, and I think speaks to your point. Kareem Hunt is second at 40%. Xavier Worthy is third at 34%. Justin Watson is fourth at 30%. So does just go to what you were saying, where I don't think, not that it's bad to stack him with multiple pass catchers, obviously, but I don't think it's nearly as necessary as it normally is when you are playing a non-rushing quarterback captain.
And then I think the same kind of goes for in the flex. Like I think you could run Mahomes out there without any pass catchers in the flex, for the same reason. You just kind of like, everything becomes a little bit more viable when you're spreading it out that much, how to construct it. I still like, generally I'm still probably going to have a rule of requiring at least one pass catcher in lineups with Mahomes. I don't know if I might just do one pass catcher required in lineups with Mahomes at captain, but like in a 150 set, I would definitely loosen up those rules where I would definitely allow for just one pass catcher in the flex. If I have Mahomes at captain, I might allow for Mahomes naked, maybe with boost to the pass catchers, whatever. But he's kind of a unique case relative to basically any other quarterback in the league, because doesn't have huge rushing upside. He does, like you said, he has a little bit. He's at like 15 yards per game on the ground this year. It's been 20 plus, I think, at least each of the past 2 years, maybe 3. So he runs a little bit. But yeah, certainly can have some looser rules there. Whereas Derek Carr, I think, still the general rules apply. You're always stacking up Derek Carr. You want to have multiple pass catchers in the flex if you have Derek Carr at captain. Are you seeing mostly Saints receivers at the top in Derek Carr captain lineups?
I would expect to. So Kamara showing up in 74% of the lineups where Carr is captain, Olave 55%, then it's Mahomes at 43, Shaheed at 40. So 3 of the top 4 guys and the top 2 both pass catchers for the Saints, even though obviously Kamara's a running back, still a pass catcher. And Kamara's optimal flex percentage when Carr is captain is more in line with what we do usually see, where it's in that like 70-ish% range. So it's a lot more what you would expect with Derek Carr.
Pretty interesting that Alvin Kamara is your top player in the flex when you have Mahomes at captain. Is that just because you're getting to a ton of Kamara in general? Like, do you have a really high?
It's just how good Kamara looks.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Because it's like price-wise, you wouldn't think Kamara would be like the one you can fit in there with Mahomes, but he just projects so well that that does make sense. Anything else?
And then also, obviously, it's not like you have negative correlation there because Kamara catches passes. Like even if this is a competitive game where the Saints are playing, a couple touchdowns down, Kamara's still getting his.
Yeah, good point. Very game script independent. Any other notes on quarterbacks before we move on to running backs?
No.
Okay. Move on, talk about those running backs and Kamara. I guess we can probably start there. Is going to have the best projection of any running back on the slate. Let me pull it up. Uh-oh, what's happening here? Refresh this. Oh. Okay, weird. I got logged out in the middle of the show, apparently. Okay. Yep, okay, now I'm logged in. Good.
There was one week that I just thought they hadn't updated projections until like Saturday.
Wait, what?
I was like, okay, they have to have them up by now, and then I realized I wasn't logged in.
I actually had that issue when I did the cage match show. Maybe it's just not sorting by running back for some reason, because it looks like I am logged in. Hang on, let me try this. I could just get. I mean, we don't really need to use this particular source, but yeah, it looks like I am logged in. I did the entire cage match show on Wednesday night without access to the fantasy points projections, and Jake kept bringing them up, and I was like, how do you, like, he has access to the behind the scenes projections, like what's going on here? And then I realized after it was over that I did have access. I was just not logged in. So that was, I need to go.
I can see them, by the way.
You can see them sorted by position?
I'm on the week 5 projections and then sorted by running back. So like I'm on a different page than you, but it's titled the same. So I don't really know.
Okay. I got it. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what was going on there. Alvin Kamara projecting for 22.7 fantasy points at fantasy points. On Roto Grinders projecting for 21 fantasy points. Going to get a lot of ownership, 44.7% projected ownership in the flex. At captain, we have Kamara at 23% ownership. Going to be pretty chalky. Really great role. We finally saw him get 9 targets last week, which, you've been kind of waiting for his passing game involvement to come through after he was targeted. I mean, throughout his career, he's been targeted so much. Hadn't really seen it much this year. Like, he's had a great year just on the ground without being targeted a lot. And then last week, again, finally saw 9 targets. How are we feeling about Kamara?
Yeah, I think he looks great. I kind of like, at least right now, don't love the slate because of how good Kamara and Mahomes look at captain and the fact that they're both going to be popular. It just feels like a slate where it's going to be kind of difficult to build lineups that I think are good and that other people aren't playing a lot of. But Kamara looks great to me. He's another one, even though he's really popular, that I think is actually, at least right now, going a little bit under-owned at captain. It's just, there's so many ways for him to get there. You have, obviously, touchdown equity on the ground, through the air. You have PPR, floor, and ceiling. And the other thing, to your point about him not necessarily being targeted a ton so far this year, is the Saints have also had weird game scripts where, they torched whoever they played week 1. They torched the Cowboys like they're playing from ahead. I do think that, the more efficient the offense is, you do probably see a little bit less volume for Kamara, just because in the past you had this offense where essentially you're sending Chris Olave and Shaheed on like go routes. They're not open. And so then you're just checking it down to Kamara, whereas now they're actually running functional routes. They're a functioning offense where you can throw the ball to the receivers. So you're going to get, lower checkdowns, fewer checkdowns than in the past probably, but still going to be heavily involved in the passing game, assuming that they're not playing with a massive leading.
Yeah, good point. It is probably just entirely game script dependent there. Doesn't have a great matchup. I guess I can pull that up. Double check myself here, but as far as schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, yeah, the worst possible matchup. The Chiefs have allowed the fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points to running backs on the season. You can see down here, not good through the air, not good on the ground. So really tough matchup for Alvin Kamara, but that's also the case for like almost all of the players on the Saints. So like and the Chiefs, like these are two tough defenses. So, some games you might lean into, okay, this is a tough matchup for this player. Let's play that player instead, or let's play that team instead. This isn't really one where you can find that many really great matchups. So I don't really think you can lean into that as much.
And I mean, we also saw like, and this is, and obviously you're aware of this, but like looking at defense versus position can be really misleading. Where like week 1, Derrick Henry didn't do shit, but Justice Hill had a great game as the pass catcher.
Right. Yeah, that is a good point. Yeah, it is all. You need to. I mean, it's all small sample size at this point. You can kind of break up the Justice Hill, Derek Carr stuff to some extent by just looking like you can. It's broken up here by through the air or versus or on the ground. So like you can see that Buffalo's defense gives up a ton of fantasy points through the air, fewer on the ground. So maybe you want to target pass catching backs there. But yeah, we're like you're saying, we're dealing with exclusively small sample sizes here. Like this is we're 4 weeks into the season. Don't want to overly rely on this, but it kind of in this case just kind of confirms what I thought was the case. Like the Chiefs defense has just been awesome this year. So it's like, yeah, I think seeing that schedule adjusted, they're still like, yeah, there's nothing matchup based about it. It's just like they've been great. It's been a great defense this year. So in this case, just kind of confirming what we already think.
Yeah. And that's kind of, I mean, in PPR, that's still kind of a benefit, like Kamara versus the other players. Because again, with this being a showdown slate, it's not like you can just go to another game. Like if the Saints or the Chiefs defense is doing a good job and taking away, passes to Olave and to Shaheed, and they're getting pressure on Carr, like all of that just leads to more PPR points for Alvin Kamara.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. So yeah, this is a slate where, we talk about that sometimes, like a lower scoring slate. Somebody had asked me, I think last week, what, if it is going to be a lower scoring slate, like how do you build for that? And it's just like, yeah, PPR scams. You just want to play the guys who are going to rack up PPR points because if they're not able to move the ball far, like those 3-yard receptions end up mattering more in low scoring slates. So yeah, it is a slate where.
Okay, sorry.
You're just going to say a slate where we can lean into guys like Kamara.
Yeah, and no Taysom Hill today is a nice bump for Kamara too.
Yeah, good point. Definitely always helps not having the Taysom threat there. Okay, I think that's probably enough on Kamara. We playing any Jamal Williams, 3,200, 4.2 projection for Jamal Williams. Guessing we're not going to any Adam Prentice or Jordan Mims. So Williams probably isn't Kendra Miller? I thought Kendra Miller's back for this game also.
I think he is too, but
okay. Yeah, maybe let me see if
I don't know if he's been activated yet.
Rotograndis has a projection for him, because that does make.
Oh no, he's doubtful.
Oh, he's doubtful. Okay, then never mind. So it is
yesterday afternoon.
All right, so it's still the Jamal Williams show for the Saints. All right, let me reload. Sorry, Jamal Williams show is a major overstatement there. On the season, Jamal Williams has handled 23 of the Saints' 107 running back carries. Is clearly Alvin Kamara's backfield, but not nothing there for Jamal Williams. Added 4 total targets on 16.7% route participation. He is again 3,200. Kind of tough to get there. I don't know. What's your level of interest in Jamal Williams?
Yeah, I mean, like I think he's okay as a cheap flex. He's projected for like 15, 16% ownership right now. Showed up like 12 to 13% of the time for me. He does get a little bit of a bump with no Hill. He had a 30% rushing share in week 1, but again, that was just a game script thing. 20% week 2, basically non-existent week 3, and then back to 13.5% last week. Yeah, he'll get hurt. So, I expect him to obviously have a role, be involved as the backup. I think that at 3,200, he's fine, but ownership's about where it should be.
Oh yeah, love this comment from Drew. He took a shot at you. He's usually just taking shots at me, but this time, love that. I think he just misspoke probably. Agreed. I think,
or he really likes Jamal Williams tonight.
Oh yeah, that could be. Yeah, it could be that Fan Screwed was just a huge fan of Jamal Williams. Yeah, he's like if he scores a touchdown, like that might be enough at 3,200. Like we saw with Dalton Kincaid last week, where he scored like under 10 fantasy points at 7,200 and still made the winning lineup. Maybe you don't need a huge score from Jamal Williams to pay off the price tag in if this is a low scoring game. And it certainly could be a low scoring game. So maybe just like a goal line vulture would be enough for Jamal Williams, even at this price tag, but it probably is going to require a touchdown. Like I don't really see him getting there without a touchdown or an injury or something, like just his usual workload. We're not going to see Jamal Williams break off a 60-yarder or something like that. So, so he's a little bit tough to get to, but I think the ownership probably reflects his range of outcomes. What do we have the ownership at on Jamal Williams? Pull up flex ownership. 18% ownership. What do you think of that number? Are you going to be?
I think it's a little high.
I do too. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, like SaberSim has it at like 16. I have him optimal around 12. So either way, I think he's probably going a little bit overowned, but nothing egregious or anything like that.
Yeah, seems fine to me. Probably a number that I'm going to be underweight to, but not like not a full fade situation like it was with Zeke yesterday, where I was just like, yeah, I'm not playing Ezekiel Elliott. Did you watch that game? He was in on like the first drive. I was like, what is going on here? Why is Zeke out there?
Yeah, I think I was over the field, but he was only like 7% on. Yeah, I had a lot of Hunter Lepke, which I was not thrilled to see Zeke playing a bigger role than he had the previous week.
Yeah, he like has not had much of a role all year. That's one of those things with Zeke where it's like you always know that it's a threat that Zeke could come in and just take a bigger role because for whatever reason they just seem to love him there. Didn't have
like
a huge role, but
the difference in that is like one, obviously the ownership. Jamal Williams getting like 20% instead of closer to 10. But like if you tell me on a showdown slate that Zeke is 7% owned, I'm gonna just play him because Mike McCarthy might give him 2 touchdowns like at some point this year. Just 2 carries from the 2 and he's optimal. Whereas it's obviously a lot less likely that Jamal Williams starts stealing multiple touchdowns from Kamara than that anybody starts stealing touchdowns from Rico Dowdle.
Yeah, good point. Although Dowdle looked great last night.
Yeah, he looked very good last night.
Aggressive Goose says Saints offensive line pretty banged up. Could see Kamara get a ton of dump off volume. Yeah, that's one of those, like, I don't think of it as being a good thing for the running backs when the offensive line is banged up, but you're right. Like it could, for somebody like Kamara who is involved in the passing game as well, could lead to more dump offs.
Yeah, it goes back to what I was saying about last year's offense versus this year's. Like the more this offense is just efficient and really good, it's good for Kamara in different ways. But as far as his passing game volume, it's going to go down because you're able to move the ball down the field. When you go up against a really good defense that's taking that away and pressuring the quarterback, it's going to revert back to kind of how things looked last year.
Yep, exactly. Chiefs, again, Kareem Hunt taking over this backfield. That's what the rumors have been, and we kind of have already seen it last week. Oh God, this stupid my laptop. I really need a new laptop at this point because now the keyboard is going. All right, Kareem Hunt last week, 32.4% route participation, saw 2 targets, had 14 of the team's 21 running back carries. So we've seen the takeover already from Kareem Hunt of this backfield. I don't think we needed to hear it elsewhere, but good to hear, I guess. Is going to lead the backfield. At least that's all indications are that he's going to lead the backfield. Projecting okay here, 12 fantasy points at 7,400. Not like a great projection there, but again, you're choosing from just players in this one game. 30% projected ownership in the flex. Curious about the captain ownership. 6% projected captain ownership. How do you feel about Kareem Hunt?
I'm pretty much in line with the field there. I think the price tag on him at 7,400 is very reasonable. He's showing up as an optimal flex play around 30 to 35% of the time. He's showing up as the optimal captain around 8% of the time. So not a super high probability play, but amongst at captain at least, but amongst the non Kamara Mahomes guys, right now he is actually the optimal captain most often, like slightly ahead of the Saints receivers and Travis Kelce. So I think that's just a pricing thing where, again, if this is just a relatively low scoring game, you at that price, you can just have him be the optimal captain because like he gets into the end zone, he gets, 70 yards and nobody else really goes crazy. So I think that there is that path for him, and it just goes back to the only players in this game that you really would feel comfortable playing at captain are all quite a bit more expensive than Hunt. So it's not a game where you have like a really deep mid-range of skill players.
Yeah, good point. We don't have that many great options here, so it makes some sense at 6% ownership. If we assume he's just going to continue to have that pretty great role that he had last week, going to look pretty good here.
Yeah. I mean, my concern would be my concern is that he's Kareem Hunt, but also my concern is, one, we know that like you get inside the 5-yard line and Andy Reid just loves doing random shit, throwing to his second, third string tight end, whatever. You could easily see Carson Steele used in those situations too. There's no guarantee here that even if Hunt gets the vast majority of the rushing opportunities, that he's dominating the most productive ones. But at his price point, I don't really think that's that big of an issue.
Yeah, no, I think that is a good point. Like, it is, even if he leads the backfield, we don't know that this kind of split is going to hold, where he had, again, 2/3 of the team's running back carries last week. He had only slightly worse route participation than Samaje Perine last week. I think it could still be very much a like hot hand situation where, like, if he's not getting it done, they're just going to make the switch mid game. So there is definitely some downside risk there, but probably going to be leading the backfield. We only have so many options, and he appears to be set to take on, I don't know if you call it a bell cow, but like at least the majority of the opportunities for the running backs. Wanted to point out it's so to your point, looking at the schedule adjusted stuff, it's not the most valuable thing in the world here. The Saints have given up the 4th fewest schedule adjusted fantasy points to running backs. So we're dealing with a small sample size. I also just want to point out, like, you look at the difference between the 4th fewest and the fewest. Like, the Chiefs have been just kind of in a world of their own in terms of limiting running back fantasy opportunities. The Saints 4th fewest, so it's pretty close as far as the tier that they're in, but they're just like only 3 fewer schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to running backs than you would expect. Whereas Kansas City, it's 11 fewer. So not nearly the same level of tough matchup for Kareem Hunt as it is for Alvin Kamara and the Saints running backs. So I thought that's kind of worth pointing out, but still a tough matchup here for Alvin Kamara. That's kind of what we're seeing across the board. How about the others? Samaje Perine, Carson Steele. I mean, we have, what are the price tags here? We've got, hang on. Samaje Perine at 6,400, Carson Steele at 4,400. Neither of them looking like great point per dollar plays. Do you have much interest in either? And I guess I can pull up the flex ownership. We've got Perine at 16% ownership. Steele down here at 5% ownership. So not a ton of ownership going there. How much interest do you have?
More than the field. They're both showing up as far as flex. Steele showing up around 14% for optimal for me. Perine around 16%. Not getting to any Steele at captain, but Perine came in at about 2%. The prices obviously aren't great for the projected role, but it goes back to what we were just saying about Kareem Hunt, where the assumption here is that this is Hunt's backfield now, at least on early downs. And I agree with that assumption, but it's far from set in stone. One thing, if you wanted to just make the case for Perine as a play, while we saw Hunt get 67% of the rushing workload last week, Perine still had his highest rushing share of the week. Of the year. He also had his highest route participation of the year. So the raw numbers last week were in favor of Hunt. But as far as trending compared to what he'd done so far this season, you're seeing Perine trend up too. And it wouldn't be shocking if he just plays a bigger role than people think and it cuts into Hunt. Again, obviously I prefer Hunt. I think it's most likely that Hunt is ahead of him, but especially given the likely passing game involvement too, it is a little bit easier for him to just kind of give you a floor and pay off that salary as long as he is still getting those routes and getting targets. So I don't love him. I don't love Steele, but in Steele's case, it's just he's 4,400, and what if he's the inside the 5 back, and that results in a touchdown or two. So I think that there's, as long as they're going to be low owned, I think there's a pretty clear case for using them some at flex. Even though, I do prefer Hunt, he is also a lot more popular.
Yeah, same page. It's, I wish the price tags were just a little bit lower. They're pretty tough price tags for the roles, but again, some standalone value, and I think pretty mega contingency value. I mean, I guess you could call this standalone value as well, just from the role could actually be better. So it could be better standalone value than we are anticipating. We're thinking Kareem Hunt going to have that bell cow role, but no guarantees that he has the same kind of usage that he had last week. Samaje Perine's involvement, at least he wasn't targeted, but 38% route participation last week is pretty promising for Perine. I think you laid it out pretty well. Perine could just be more involved in the passing game. Steele could be the goal line back. They have opportunities there. Wish they were both a little bit cheaper, but I guess that drives down the ownership. Yeah, some interest there for sure for me. The 16% on Perine was kind of surprising because I think he could just like, depending on the game script, could end up being a lot more involved. Like if they're playing from behind. I mean, Kareem Hunt is a capable pass catcher also, so not sure that they would necessarily just go more to Perine entirely.
In theory, like I'm not sure Kareem Hunt is actually a capable football player, period, at this point.
Yeah, oh, good. Yeah, good point. Yeah, he's historically throughout his career has been a capable pass catcher, but yeah, in 2024, who knows? Who knows if that's really the case?
The other thing too, and it just goes back to the point that I was making about Hunt, is this isn't a slate that has a lot of good secondary options. So even though Perine is overpriced at 6,400, he's still projected in terms of just raw points as like, I don't know, the 8th highest scorer or something on the slate, I think. Because and everybody ahead of him, with the exception of Hunt, is way more expensive, and obviously Hunt's more expensive too. But he projects in like the same range as like Harrison Butker, who's cheaper. But the guys ahead of him, Kamara, Mahomes, Kelsey, Olave, Carr, Shaheed, Worthy, those guys are all way more expensive. Hunt's a bit more expensive. So there is just that path too, where if all of the mediocre guys in this game just kind of don't do anything and Perine does slightly more than them, there's still, that path to him being optimal too.
Yeah, again, just going back to the example we had last week with Dalton Kincaid, where it's just like he had a terrible point score for 7,200. Like I was like, I didn't play him because he was 7,200. I was like, yeah, he's probably not going to get there. And then even at sub 10 fantasy points, like in a low scoring game, where especially a low scoring game where the Chiefs offense at least spreads the ball around a ton too. Like we could just not have that many great fantasy scores, in which case a lot easier to pay off 6,400, because it's not like a full slate where like you need a certain, like you're probably going to need a certain number of fantasy points for this player to be viable. It's like we don't really know how many fantasy points you're going to need in a low scoring, spread it out offense kind of game. So yeah, that is a good point.
Yeah, if you had multiple games to choose from here, 6,400 would just be like a complete non-starter. Yeah. But now it's just like, yeah, okay, I'm overpaying for his projection, but he also still projects better than like everybody that's cheaper than him.
Yep. All right, wide receivers. We've got these Saints guys at the top, Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed in terms of projection. I'm going to move the here we go. Again, no great matchups here for anybody, but let's start with the Saints side, because they do have the top projected receivers on the slate. Let me see if that is. I assume that is going to be the same everywhere. Olave projected for 15 here. Shaheed 13 fantasy points. Shaheed is 8,000. Olave 10,000. Again, just have the one game to choose from in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. The Chiefs are kind of middling, not the toughest matchup, but not a great one either. They have been a little bit of a slot funnel, not totally a slot funnel. I don't know. And looking at the data for the Saints, I don't know that was all that impactful. I don't think there was anybody who's just always running from the slot anyway, so it's you can't really there's no real beneficiary because everybody's kind of running 30% from the slot. I don't know, how are you feeling about the Saints receivers, Shaheed and Olave, to start?
Yeah, not great about either one. I think it's a tough matchup. Obviously we already kind of mentioned, and it was mentioned in chat, the Saints O-line potentially having issues. The Chiefs have used two high looks, the second most often in the NFL behind the Vikings, which isn't ideal when you're talking about guys that are looking to get open deep, especially in the case of Shaheed. But at the same time, they have as much upside as pretty much anybody on the slate. You can talk all you want about coverages and matchups and all of that. It takes one busted play and they're optimal. So, and obviously, they're going to have those opportunities. It's not like the Saints are going to come into this game and say like, well, we don't like the coverages the Chiefs are going to use, so we're not going to have Olave and Shaheed run routes or something. Like, they're still going to be out there, and stuff happens in a football game. So still as high ceiling as anybody on the slate. Obviously, it is a difficult matchup. You would feel better about them if they were facing most other teams. You can make the case for maybe trying to find guys, that do run routes over the middle of the field a little bit, but that doesn't really exist too much on the Saints either. So, like you were saying, you don't have that consistent guy that you're expecting to be doing that. So, with the caveat that they are less likely to succeed here than they are in a lot of other matchups, they're still the two of the best highest upside plays on the slate.
Yeah, I think you laid it up perfectly. I was having this conversation with Scott Barrett, just checking in on the numbers this year, because historically, both Shaheed and Olave better against zone coverage as opposed to man coverage. And the Chiefs play zone coverage. Wait, do I have this sort of right? Yeah, zone coverage at the 4th lowest rate in the league. So, like, theoretically, a pretty bad matchup for both Shaheed and Olave. So far this year, Olave actually not that bad against man coverage, 2.2 yards per hour. And he's actually been pretty good against man coverage. Rashid Shaheed, 0.0 yards per route run against man coverage. So not really doing anything against man so far this year. But again, even though, look, and versus zone, Olave 3 yards per route run. So really good. And Shaheed 3.6. Those are elite numbers for both of them against zone. So it's a, tough matchup, but still Kansas City, it's 54.9% zone. So, like, even though it is, the 4th lowest rate in the league, they're still playing zone at 54.9% of the time. So it is going to be still a majority of the routes that these guys are running is going to be against zone, which where they are better. So yeah, not the best matchup in terms of the number of opportunities they're going to have against the coverage that they tend to succeed in, but still going to have some opportunities, and obviously at some point you're probably going to see Rashid Shaheed catch a ball against man coverage at some point as well. So, so yeah, it's not a great matchup, but we have one single game to choose from. As you said, there could just be a broken play at some point where one of them scores. Somebody's going to have to score fantasy points in this game, and these are two of the more likely to do so. Looking at Saints opportunity on the season, Olave leads the team in Olave leads the team in route participation, 83.3%, second with 23 targets. Shaheed second in route participation, 80.6%, leads the team with 25 targets. Like, they just far and away, just look at the target share, and they are head and shoulders above anybody else on the team. Need to play somebody.
Kind of like, not only is Olave just probably a better receiver than Shaheed, but when you look at the route break numbers on fantasy points, Shaheed basically running 40% vertical routes, 40-ish% horizontal breaking routes. Horizontal breaking routes are generally just better for fantasy anyway. But Olave is running twice as, like, from a percentage standpoint, twice as many horizontal breaking routes as vertical. When you're talking about a defense that you're expecting to make it difficult to get open deep anyway, I do like, from a route standpoint at least, what Olave is running more than what Shaheed's running.
Yeah. And the ownership is also going to, at least I think, let's see, what is the ownership? We got Olave at 33% ownership, Shaheed at actually not that different, 30% projected ownership in the flex. Olave more expensive at 10,000 versus Shaheed's 8,000 relative to these numbers. So 33% for Olave, starting with the flex, 33% flex. Actually, let's tie it in together. 33% flex ownership for Olave, 30% for Shaheed, and then captain ownership, we have Olave coming in at 9%, Shaheed coming in at 7%. Are you making any major stands relative to the field in any of those spots?
No, they're all pretty close. Like, Shaheed's showing up as an optimal flex 29% of the time for me. He's showing up as optimal captain 7%, which is more or less what you just said ownership wise. Olave showing up optimal flex 29% of the time, optimal captain 7%. So maybe that salary difference between them, even though I do obviously prefer Olave, salary agnostic, is making a difference where Shaheed maybe shows up a little bit more for me, maybe going a little bit less over-owned relative to the field, but for the most part, I think ownership's pretty efficient on
them. Just trying to see. So they let A.T. Perry go. In week 4, we had Mason Tipton running routes on 52.6% of dropbacks, saw just one target. So, in week 4, 11 targets go to Shaheed, 9 go to Olave, 1 goes to Tipton, and then you have the tight end Juwan Johnson. Cedric Wilson ran routes on just 5. Looks like Mason Tipton would be the next best bet of any Saints receiver, just based on his route participation last week. I don't really know that I'd consider anybody else. You look at the projections, it looks like that is kind of same thing. Tipton has a little bit of a projection here at 1,000. Wilson, Bub Means don't really even, not even a projection of 1. Looking at Roto Grinders, we have Tipton at 1.5 projection. Actually, they have Cedric Wilson projected for 2. It's interesting. But I would think it would be, my inclination would be Mason Tipton just based on last week. Do you see things differently? Do you have any read on are you playing any of the tertiary receivers on the Saints?
Probably not much, if any, but I do agree that like Tipton is the one that I would go to first. 52.5% route participation last week, 48% the week before that. Also, Cedric Wilson 15% 2 weeks ago, 5% last week. Obviously, these numbers can change week to week, but pretty clearly, I think if you are just trying to guess the most likely outcome, it's that Tipton is running routes ahead of Wilson.
Yeah, that seems to be the case based on last week. So Tipton seems playable to me. I don't currently have any major stand there. I'll dig in deeper before the evening show. I'm not sure. Maybe I'll find something that will change my opinion here. But yeah, Tipton to me seems like the better bet. Still just 1,000.
Yeah, I have him optimal in the flex like 5-ish% of the time.
Yeah, so like slightly better than where the field's playing him. And then the Chiefs side, of course, we have no Rashee Rice. So we have becomes more interesting, I guess, in some ways. These Chiefs receivers, we've got Xavier Worthy priced up at 9,000. So they've already priced him up for Rashee Rice being out. We have Justin Watson at 3,400, Juju Smith-Schuster at 2,800, Sky Moore 1,600. It's a mess. I think we can probably start with Xavier Worthy as like the one who stands out as a like projectable play to some extent, and I'll pull up what happened last week here. So, because I think looking at the full season data is just not going to be that helpful. So I think it's more helpful to just look at what happened after Rashee Rice ran just 3 routes last week, what happened for the rest of the game. And it's still not necessarily all that indicative of what they want to do. As I noted earlier, we've got Justin Ross and Nico Remigio have been practicing with the starters this week. One of them, maybe both of them, get called up from the practice squad. Could be a real mess here. We don't really know what they want to do if they have all of their receivers that they want active. Those guys, I assume, were not active last week. So last week we saw Sky Moore ran 4 routes. Justin Watson 62%, 21 routes, 62% route participation. We had Juju Smith-Schuster 44% route participation. I don't know. It's kind of a mess to me. Looking at the Chiefs, what they are probably going to do here. I think the ownership is not going to be that high as a result. I don't know. Do you want to start with Worthy? Where do you want to start with the Chiefs receivers? Because it's kind of a mess.
We start with Worthy, and I think that there are like pros and cons here for Worthy. I think obviously one of the cons you mentioned, he's already 9K. So they already adjusted his salary, assuming that he's getting a bump with no Rice, which on one hand, he is going to get a bump. Like you assume he's going to run more routes at the very least. He ran routes on 82% of dropbacks last week. That was his highest mark of the season. I assume he's just going to be on the field more. I'm not convinced, and obviously Rice not being out there just opens up targets in general. So all of that is a positive for Worthy. I'm not convinced that he's a huge beneficiary on like a consistency basis, though, because he plays an entirely different role than Rice. This is somebody they use as a deep threat. He runs a lot of routes that are typically just routes that are not going to be heavily targeted. And taking Rice out doesn't change that. It doesn't make it so, running go routes is suddenly a really good thing to be doing from a target standpoint. And I don't think Worthy's role is really changing. When you look at, the types of routes that Rice runs and running from the slot and all of that, it's more likely that you just get some combination of Justin Watson and Juju stepping in and taking a lot of those. I think Kelsey probably getting more involved over the middle of the field as well. So I think that Worthy ends up being on the field more, which is a positive, but I don't think it's as simple as just saying, well, Rice was their number 1 receiver, Worthy's their number 2 receiver, now Worthy's the number 1 receiver. And you do kind of just see that a lot, not as much now, but in the past in DFS, you see it all the time where wide receiver 1 is out. That means more targets for wide receiver 2. And it really doesn't work that way for a variety of reasons. One, they just have different roles or different players. Also, you have the efficiency issue where Rice was a big part of this offense, and just replacing him with Justin Watson and Juju is going to make the offense less efficient. So, those are certainly negatives and things to keep in mind with Worthy. The ownership isn't very high, so this isn't as much of something to harp on as it would be if like his salary were still at $7K and you had him being really, really popular because people are just saying Rice is out, Worthy is good. Then I think he would really have to like dig into, okay, how good exactly do I think Worthy is? How big is that bump without Rice? Now I think it's pretty safe to say that the salary adjusted, correctly, if not a little bit too much. But then you just get back to the fact that he's relatively low owned. And just like we were saying with the Saints receivers, even if he's not super likely to succeed, he is still a big play threat. And it takes one big play for him to probably be optimal. So at low ownership, I think he's perfectly fine. I'm pretty much around the field as far as optimal percentage versus flex. But I do think it's just kind of an interesting like spot to dig into because it's very much an example to me where you can't just like plug Worthy in as like the next Rashee Rice in this offense. We did see Watson run, very high percentage of routes from the slot. We saw Juju run routes from the slot, Kelsey running routes from the slot at an increased rate last week. So I do think you see a bump for all of those guys. Obviously, Kelsey is the only one of the group that you're going to feel confident is really on the field a lot. I do think Watson is probably ahead of Juju, but who knows? Like that could be a hot hand situation. So I think the wide receiver room is really interesting and volatile, both in terms of production and just opportunities. But as a result, you do also probably see relatively flat ownership there. Like Justin Watson, 3,400 at flex. Saberson only has him projected for around 15% ownership. They have Worthy at about 17% at 9K. They have Juju at about 10% at 2,800. I think those numbers all come up. Like I think I have Juju showing up optimal at flex like 22% of the time. Same goes for Watson. So I do think the ownership comes up in the projections I mentioned. I didn't look at what RotoGrinders has. But I think, just kind of in that 20% range for all three of those receivers is a pretty good expectation.
Yeah, and what do we have? So let's take a look at the RotoGrinders ownership. I think you did a great job of laying everything out. Like I agree, this is clearly not a spot where like, oh yeah, Xavier Worthy's just going to step into the Rashee Rice role. Like it doesn't work that way at all. Like some teams that like sort of happens to an extent, but this is definitely not one of those teams where you just see him step into a huge role. At least I wouldn't expect him. But I mean, maybe they use him in more like gadgety ways since they can't just rely on Rashee Rice if they don't have a consistent receiver. So he does benefit, but I think you laid it out nicely. It's just like it's not like he just like steps into that role and suddenly he's going to be used like Rashee Rice was used, and you can consider him elite in that sense.
Right. Like I think he sees more, design targets. He probably gets an extra screen or two that would have gone to Rice. Maybe he gets an extra handoff or two. But I don't think you're going to see Xavier Worthy out there running 5-yard slants all game and catching 10 passes.
Yeah, exactly. Looking at the Chiefs ownership, so we have in the flex Xavier Worthy 27%. So that seems reasonable to me. Justin Watson 18%, Juju Smith-Schuster 17.5%. So between those two, Watson and Juju Smith-Schuster, who would you be more likely? Who do you think you'd be more into at this, basically the same ownership?
I think they're really, so I will say that those ownership projections are a lot more in line with like my numbers where they were all showing up like 20 to 23% optimal. So I do just buy into those ownership numbers more instead of saying like, oh, the field is just going to completely botch this and not play any of these receivers. So I mean, I think like Juju and Watson were both showing up with very similar optimal rates around like 21, 22%. I think it would probably really just kind of come down to where I have the salary. Like I prefer Watson, but he is $600 more or whatever it is. Like I think he's ahead of Juju, but I also don't think it's by like a big enough margin where it's super actionable for DFS. We saw Juju a couple weeks ago score the touchdown on like the one play that Rice missed. They threw him in around the goal line. So I think there's just a ton of volatility there. I think that they're very similar plays. I think Watson projects, a little bit better because I do think he's ahead of Juju in the rotation.
Yep, I think I see it kind of the same way there. It's weird with Juju, just like it has felt like Mahomes, for whatever reason, just wants to get Juju touchdowns. Like it seems like he has like an outsized share of targets in the red zone. They had the one that he dropped like right on the goal line in, I don't know if that was week 1, just for whatever reason. It seemed like they were trying to scheme Juju with those a little bit more. But Justin Watson, has that kind of splash play potential, just can break off a 40-50 yarder, has done that throughout his career. I think slight preference for Justin Watson, but I'm with you. It's not like a huge thing. Sky Moore, I still think probably like I don't think they believe in Sky Moore, so I'm not really concerned about getting him into my lineups. He's just a stay away for me.
He actually ran a slightly lower. He had slightly lower route participation last week than he did in week 3.
Yeah, they just it's over. It's very over for Sky Moore.
What about Hardman status does matter. I think like if he's out, you probably get more routes for Moore, but again, not expecting a lot out of that. And then also it goes back to who do they elevate? Is Justin Ross going to be ahead of Sky Moore?
That's what I was going to say. Like, would you? So both Justin Ross and Nico Rumigio are min price 200. Did you have any kind of idea at this point? I know it's pretty early. You probably want to give it more thought, but like to me, if one of them is elevated from the practice squad, I'm probably going to have interest there. Just given again, what was the quote here? It was they're practicing with the starters, I believe. Let me reread it again. Justin Ross and Nico Remigio both received first team reps. Okay, so received first team reps doesn't necessarily mean that they're like going with the ones like we had with Britton Covey. Like they received reps just to kind of try them out. Who knows? But if one of them, I think particularly if one of them gets called up and the other does not, I think I'll have some interest at 200. I don't know. What's your read on the situation with Justin Ross and Nico Remigio?
I think that tweet is mostly meaningless. Like you said, it's not like they were out there like ahead of Worthy or something. And It was both of them too. So it's not like, these two guys from the practice squad were practicing and they were running Justin Ross with the ones a good amount.
Right.
I don't think that they were like elevating two receivers from the practice squad to the number one unit or anything like that. Probably just, trying to get some familiarity with Mahomes because they might have to catch a pass from him tonight. So I don't really read anything into that tweet at all, other than one or both of them might be active. But if they're both active, then, again, it just becomes if they're $200 or whatever, I assume, and maybe they catch a deep pass. But other than that, you're not expecting anything. If only one gets elevated, obviously that's better. If one gets elevated and Hardman is out, that is kind of like best case, I think. But barring some sort of report like, Hardman is out, Ross is elevated, and we expect Ross to work ahead of Moore and Watson, or ahead of Moore. Like, barring something like that, I assume that whoever gets elevated from the practice squad is still buried on the depth chart.
I think that's probably a reasonable assumption. And also, I think to your point, we'd probably still want Mecole Hardman out. The full quote is Justin Ross and Nico Remigio both received first team reps this week at receiver with Rashee Rice out and Mecole Hardman dealing with a knee injury. So receiving first team reps with Mecole Hardman out, it probably wouldn't be that interesting to me unless we get just one of them elevated and Mecole Hardman out. Then suddenly becomes like, okay, this might be a real thing. Maybe I really need to consider this. But it's I think you're probably right that it's doesn't really tell us all that much. Just the way they're practicing, just giving them some reps with Mahomes, not all that impactful. But we'll know at in a couple hours. We'll know the practice squad elevations. So we'll make sure that I know that before the evening show.
Also, another thing that kind of like points me in that direction, where like I'm not barring a very explicit report that like these guys are going to play a lot or one of them's going to play a lot. Another reason that I have a hard time thinking that they are going to have like some big role is, again, who they're trying to replace in Rice. You're talking about somebody running, a lot of short routes, and, that's not, if you're like a really good route runner and just going to be able to step in and replace Rice, you're probably not on the practice squad in the first place. It's not like they're looking for somebody to replace Worthy. Like, we need a fast guy to go be a deep threat. Let's throw Justin Ross in there. I think that if you're capable of being, the good route runner, over the middle kind of guy, you're probably already on the team.
Yeah, you're not on the practice squad if you have the Rashee Rice skill set. Yeah, that's a good call out. Ryan Stubbs asks, is Hollywood out for the whole year? I believe so. I think I'm like 95% sure Hollywood Brown
most
is
likely out for the whole year.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else at receiver? I think did we cover it in full? I think we covered it pretty fully here. Unless you have any other notes.
No.
All right. Move on, talk about some tight ends and Travis Kelce. We did see the bump for Kelce last week. Looking at the route participation up to Where is he? 91.2% route participation, saw 9 targets last week with Rashee Rice. So, it's kind of what I would have expected to be the case, that Kelsey would get a big bump, kind of what we saw last week. Are you buying into it? Do you think are you going to be playing a lot of Kelsey this week?
Yeah, I buy into it because logically it makes sense. Like, just in so many ways, when you think about where Rice is running his routes, and then you take those away, and you don't have a very clear replacement amongst the wide receiver group, it makes sense for Kelsey to be more involved. It also just makes sense from, people that, played best ball. One of the concerns on Kelsey when you're drafting is, are the Chiefs going to take it easy on him during the regular season? They're obviously a really good team. They don't need him to go out there and dominate because they have Rice and Hollywood and Worthy. Now you're down to Worthy. You actually need Kelsey to go back out there and be a big time playmaker in this offense now. So, kind of whatever angle you want to approach it from, whether it's Rice was just a more efficient way to, more efficient guy to throw to on these short routes and routes over the middle, whether it's they're intentionally, just trying to limit Kelsey a little bit, whatever it is, they need Kelsey more now, both in terms of catching those passes, being available, running those routes, and also just being a playmaker. So logically it makes sense. You saw it bear out in the numbers too, where he ran routes on 91% of plays. He had a 31% target share as well. So everything kind of just lines up where exactly what you would expect to happen if you take Rice out of the offense happened as far as Kelsey's role.
Yeah, looks pretty bullish for Kelsey here. Just another way that I got things wrong in best ball. Kelsey was one of the few elite tight ends that I just fully faded, and now of course he's the one that benefits from 2 of his star receivers being out for the year. Not loving.
The saving grace for me is I don't think I drafted a ton of Kelsey either, but I don't feel like I got it wrong because I did draft a ton of Rice. So I think I actually got it exactly right, and then Mahomes blew out Rice's knee.
Yeah, then the worst case scenario happened. RIP. Okay. Looking at schedule adjusted, looks like a very middling matchup for Travis Kelsey. At least it's not a objectively bad matchup for tight ends against New Orleans. Looks pretty bullish for Kelsey. Looking at the ownership here, we have Kelsey at captain 12% of the time in the flex. Kelsey at, where is it? Thought I'd just see. Oh, here it is. 36% of the time. How do you so less than 50% total ownership on Kelsey? Do you think you're going to be sub 50%? You get above 50%. Where are you going to be at with Kelsey?
So right now he's showing up 44% total optimal percentage for me, 38% at flex, 6.5 at captain. I think that might be a little bit low there. Just kind of looking at my projection and maybe not having adjusted enough for the difference in role for Kelsey this week versus previous weeks. So it is a spot where there's a pretty good chance I think I end up with a higher projection on Kelsey by lock than I have right now, which would obviously push him up a bit. He's still, as is, one of the best plays on the slate for me. He has the 3rd highest overall optimal percentage behind only Kamara and Mahomes. He's showing up as the 3rd highest flex option behind those guys. He's the 5th highest captain option, but it's pretty close between him, Olave, and Hunt. And Shaheed, kind of just lumped in with those guys. But I do think there's a pretty decent chance to buy lock. I've kind of just come up on him a little bit to where there's a little bit more of a gap between him and that group because of the fact that I do think there's a role change for him, a substantial role change for him this week versus previous weeks, and the fact that he's less expensive than all of those guys that I mentioned except for Shaheed.
Yep. Feel the exact same way. I like the role for Kelsey. I think he's going to be somebody that I'm probably, I would guess I end up with Kelsey in over 50% of my lineups. Just looks too good. The role is too good. Should see a lot of targets. So going to be leaning in there a little bit. As far as other Chiefs tight ends, we have Noah Gray, Jared Wiley. This is not working. Okay. What I kind of thought that we'd see, I thought maybe we'd see more route participation for Noah Gray than we've seen in the past. Just 29% last week after Rashee Rice left. That is right in line with his season 30% route participation numbers. Jared Wiley 9.4% for the season. Last week, Jared Wiley at 8.8%. So no real change for the backup tight ends last week with Rashee Rice out. Do you think that maybe that changes this week? Do you think there's potential for one of these tight ends to get more work with Rashee Rice out, even though we didn't see it last week?
Yeah, I mean, there's the potential for it. Like if they just run two tight end sets and you're just not putting Watson and Juju on the field as much, like that's a way they can go. I don't think it's the most likely way, but it's a path at least. It's definitely something to consider when we've talked before on the show about there being not only volatility and variance in the actual production, but in your inputs and what you assume is going to happen. It's definitely something to keep in mind where, I'm not projecting it to happen a ton. I'm going to assume that Gray just kind of continues to run the same role that we've seen him running. But there is certainly a higher chance that he gets a bump here than there would be if Rice were in. But I think the most likely case is still that he is in basically the same situation. And then one other thing I wanted to mention with Kelsey too, he's obviously not been very productive overall this year, but the Saints have used man coverage at one of the higher rates in the league. Kelsey so far this season averaging 0.3 fantasy points per route run overall, 0.49 fantasy points per route against man coverage. He's been absolute garbage against zone. So while he hasn't been very good overall, he has still been much better against man than against zone.
Yeah, that's a good note. So pretty bullish overall for Kelsey. The projection pretty good for Noah Gray across the industry. Everybody has him around 6 fantasy points, which seems decent at 2.6K. Looks pretty good. The ownership on Noah Gray, 16% projected ownership in the flex. In the captain spot, we have Noah Gray at 1% projected ownership. That's 16% number feels pretty good to me at 2.6K, even without a role change. Not awesome. Like I don't want to jam him in there, given that he's running routes on 30% of dropbacks. But I don't know. How do you feel about 16% projected flex ownership for Noah Gray?
I think it's pretty much correct. Shows up as optimal 18% of the time for me.
Yeah,
I think you can play him with Kelsey. That's not an issue. You can play him with any of the other Chiefs pass catchers. So I think that is a factor too, where not that obviously in Showdown you can play two running backs together also, but you don't expect the same sort of negative correlation just because Gray is cheap enough, and also Kelsey's probably just going to be involved enough where if Gray scores a touchdown and has a couple catches total, there's a pretty decent chance he ends up being optimal, and Kelsey still can also be optimal. So I think that's something where there's just kind of less of a negative correlation between the two pass catchers, even though they do play the same position, which is going to help kind of drive that up as opposed to, if you were to use a backup running back or something.
Yep, I like that. Adam, I think we have a good prompt here for you to give a little talk about Endgame Syndicate. Beast Per Fast, is there a course or someone that you guys recommend for creating your own projections? Tell me about Endgame Syndicate a little bit.
Yeah, so that's kind of our goal at Endgame was the four of us, Utical, Brick75, Nerdy Tenor, and myself, wanted to start a site that kind of taught you to be more, have more sustainable success. Hopefully, over time, help you cut down on your subscription costs elsewhere. So you don't have to just pay for a bunch of publicly available stuff unless you want to. But we all approach it differently. We have a bunch of videos up, more to come. Just strategy, instructional DFS videos. Brick75 has videos up on how to create projections, how to create ownership projections, all of that stuff. Nerdy has videos up on a lot of game theory and strategy stuff using toy games to demonstrate how you should be approaching larger concepts in DFS. I have videos up. Yuta has videos up, both kind of outlining our processes. We all approach the game differently. I still use a lot of publicly available stuff. But yeah, we have videos up on that, and that's kind of just our idea in general is, there's not really anything. There's a lot of really good sites as far as hey, we'll give you the data and you can do what you want with it, which is really useful. Like I said, I still use a lot of it, but there's nothing really that where if you're trying to improve your game and get better at doing that kind of stuff where you don't have to rely on anybody else that'll help you do it.
Yeah, I think so. So just as far as Beastverse goes, yeah, I think Endgame Syndicate. I know Brick has put out videos on how to do your own projections.
Also, a really good Discord too, with a lot of really good players and really smart people. Where
you got shady advice in there, just giving away advice for free. I mean,
he actually just did he just recorded a video for us.
Oh, did he really?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but him and Brick did a video together that came out a couple days ago. So yeah, it's the kind of thing too where if you watch the video and you still have questions, obviously Brick will answer, but there's people in Discord too that are really knowledgeable, have really good answers to a lot of stuff.
Yeah, definitely check out Endgame Syndicate if you are interested in getting into any of your own stuff. Really useful information over there. And your Dub Club is also included in Endgame Syndicate. Is that right?
Yeah, the data that I put out for Dub Club, yeah, because like my idea with Dub Club was basically if for whatever reason the cost at Endgame doesn't make sense, you don't play enough volume, and you just want data, you can use mine. So yeah, I include that at Dub Club or at Endgame rather for anyone that wants it.
Yeah. Alex, we do not. And thank you. I like us both too. Yeah,
I
no.
like one of us more than the other. You guys can guess.
Same, actually. Same. All right. Tight ends. It's me for the record. It's probably clearer with Adam. Like Adam just loves himself some Adam, but like with me, people might not be as clear. But no, I like myself better than I like Adam. Also, so screw you, Adam. All right. Saints tight ends. Juwan Johnson going to have the best projection here. Nobody projecting all that well for the Saints. They just have such a mess of a rotation. Helps that we don't have Taysom in there. What's your level of interest in Juwan Johnson, Foster Moreau, etc.? And actually, before you answer, I should note, in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed, best spot for Saints tight ends. That the Chiefs have given up the most schedule adjusted fantasy points to tight ends. Now, I don't know to what extent that is just a major fluke because like they majorly limited, they focused on stopping Mark Andrews, they majorly limited him, and then it was Isaiah Likely had that awesome game against the Chiefs. Then you had I think Mike Gesicki went off against them. Kind of seems like I've heard other people say it's like they just try to stop your best player. So which would benefit Juwan Johnson if they're trying to stop the Saints' best player. But so far has been the best spot for tight ends. With all that said, what is your level of interest in Saints tight ends?
Yeah, I like them quite a bit for the reasons you were saying, and it goes back to what we were saying about Olave and Shaheed at the beginning. There's not like a clear beneficiary of them taking those guys away in terms of like a really good pass catcher on the Saints that's just going to get a bunch of targets. But Johnson's the closest guy probably. Like you've seen his route participation ramp up. They were kind of limiting him a bit at the start of the season, but ran routes on 58% of dropbacks last week, which was a season high. Still only had an 8% target share with the vast majority going to Shaheed, Olave, and Kamara, as you would expect. But I am obviously not expecting the Chiefs to come into this game selling out to stop Juwan Johnson and getting beat by Chris Olave and Shaheed. So I do think the opportunities are going to be there. I do like that his route participation has gone up. Foster Moreau ran a season low 13% of routes last week, didn't draw a target. Not to say, again, that's indicative of this week. Obviously, it could be more spread out, but things are trending in Juwan Johnson's favor. I think both of these guys are playable in a showdown format, but I would rather play Juwan Johnson first, at I think $400 more. I have him optimal at flex 17% of the time, optimal at captain 1% of the time, Moreau optimal at flex like half as often, like 8-9% of the time. So I do prefer Johnson here. I do think this is another spot where by lock, there's actually a chance that I might have even a little bit bigger gap here once I go back and kind of like double check my numbers on exactly how I'm projecting the tight ends. But I like the matchup. I think that if there is a soft spot here that you're going to target, it is probably here, and it is probably, again, Kamara getting more targets. But I also like that you're just seeing Johnson kind of separate, and it's not like it's a surprise. This is somebody that you expected to be the number one receiving tight end here, and he was just dealing with, I think it was a foot injury. I'm not positive, but was intentionally being limited, and now we're getting further into the season.
Yeah, the only confusing thing is, I thought he was going to be limited to start the year, going to have a better role throughout the year. I don't know what happened in week 3 here, where he had
week 2,
week 3, it was week 2. Yeah, week 2. So it was week 1 had 42% route participation, dropped down to 18% week 2. I don't remember I don't think there was an injury. Maybe I just missed something there. But I think we can probably throw that out back up to 44% week 3, up to 58% week 4. Things seem to be trending in the right direction, even if it is not a straight line. So I'm with you. I like Juwan Johnson. Think he should have a pretty big role here. I think there is a gap there. Love to see that little gap last week between Juwan Johnson and Foster Moreau.
Week 2 was also the blowout win against the Cowboys. Week 1 was the blowout win against the Panthers. So I'm not saying like he didn't run routes because it was a blowout. Obviously, Moreau ran more, but it could have just been a case too where like Moreau was just on the field more for whatever reason and happened to be out there on dropbacks. Like it's not like you had a ton of dropbacks in either one of those games. So route participation numbers are just easier to skew, obviously.
Roto says Juwan Johnson at 18% projected ownership in the flex. Do you see a number that's drastically different than that? That seems really good to me. Like I would lean into that for sure.
It seems pretty correct to me.
Oh, really?
So SaberSim's way lower, but again, I don't think that's right. They're at like 10 or 11%, which would be an absolute smash. With the stuff I ran before the show, Johnson's optimal rated flex was like 17.5%. So that's pretty much in line with the ownership. Again, I do think that I probably end up a little bit higher on that by the time we get the lock. So maybe going a little bit under owned, but I don't think it really stands out as crazy.
Okay. It stands out to me a little bit just based on the role, the matchup, the fact they're probably going to limit. I don't know.
I think, like I'm saying, I don't think the ownership projection is like obviously low. I think it's very reasonable to say that like he should be more popular.
Okay, but, so you like him better than that projected ownership? Like
right now, I'm around it, and I think that my projection on him right now is probably lower than it will be by lock. So I probably do like him better. But I'm saying like sometimes when we do a morning show, I'll look at like the ownership projections and I'll look at my numbers and be like, "There's no way this ownership stays there." I don't think that's the case with Johnson. Like I think the ownership is very good.
And then Foster Moreau kind of feels like a typical backup tight end. Like if he scores a touchdown, we want him. Not going to have a ton of opportunities. Not a priority for me. Same for you.
I think he's just too close in salary to Johnson. He's obviously playable. Like I said, he's showing up like 8 to 9% optimal for me. But given that I think Johnson is ahead of him, I don't think this is, sometimes Johnson's gonna be on the field running routes. Sometimes Moreau is. I do buy into Johnson being ahead of him as far as drawing targets and running routes. I think the salary is just a little bit too close.
Yep. And then finally, kickers and defenses. We've got Butker coming in at 18% projected ownership. Chiefs defense, 20%. Where are we? Groupie at 14%. Saints defense at 13%. You taking any major stands, kickers and defenses? We can. I mean, this is always a pretty short segment because it's so hard to predict typically, right. and I don't have any huge great ideas at this point. Maybe I will by the evening show, but as of right now, I don't have any major opinions, takes on kickers and defenses.
The only thing that I see right now is like Butker and the Chiefs defense are showing up optimal more often for me than Groupie and the Saints defense. But other than that, no real. I don't have any like Harrison Butker ability takes or anything like that. Just obviously. I guess you could certainly say that he does benefit from Rice being out. The offense is going to be less efficient, you assume. It's still not going to be a bad offense, probably. So they're just more likely to kind of, stall out around the 30 more often.
That's a good point. Yeah, could benefit Butker to some extent. If I come up with any other takes, I guess I'll share them later. If you have not already done so, please do subscribe to both of our YouTube channels. I know I said it earlier, but need to repeat it because some people miss parts of the show. So if you have not already subscribed to Endgame Syndicate, highly recommend it. Flannelverse, would love to have you. Would appreciate as we try to grow our small channels. Adam, do you have any other notes on this game and where can people find you?
No other notes on the game. You can find me either at Endgame or using the Dub Club links. Again, Dub Club is just my data. Endgame is all the other stuff with Yuta, Brick, Nerdy, and my data. Really good Discord over there. So highly recommend checking that out if it makes sense for you.
Yep, check it out if you haven't done so. I guess I should say, if you have interest in most of the tools we use today, it is Fantasy Points tools. If you have interest, Flannelman is the promo code. You can find all the links to Adam's Dub Club, to all of my affiliate deals are in the description, at least on the Flannelverse YouTube. So check that out. If you have interest in checking out the Fantasy Points data, you can get 25% off using promo code Flannelman. Also, the Roto-Grinders, which now I've finally learned how to use, the Roto-Grinders projections. That is, the link is available. You can get $10 off the NFL subscription. Link in the description for that as well. Check it all out if you haven't already done so. Thank you for hanging out with us as we broke down this game. Thanks, Adam, for joining as usual. And I'll be back tonight, 90 minutes prior to lock. That's like 6:45, I think, Eastern time. Go about an hour with updated information. So check that out if you haven't done so. Otherwise, Adam and I will be back on Thursday. Thanks, guys. We'll catch you next time.